Chapter 12. Some Version of the Truth. "So I take it you do know each other?" Redman observed wryly. Father Waterman nodded. "It's been a while, hasn't it, mate?" he said, looking at the doctor warily. "A long time," the doctor replied. Redman sat down again. "So tell me about it, for the record." The doctor and Waterman looked at the tape player, then each other. "Egypt," Waterman began. "Indeed," the doctor concurred, and wondered how the time meddler was going to talk his way out of this one. Waterman nodded. "Well," he began, turning to D.S. Redman, "it was before your time. He and I were different men then." Waterman chuckled. "Very true," the doctor muttered. "How long ago?" Redman asked the doctor. "Seems like an eternity," the doctor said. "Before your time, love," Waterman said to Redman. The doctor expected her to sneer at the word love, but to his amazement, she began to smile a little. Here was the time meddler himself, the doctor thought, the Time Lord responsible for multiple attempts to alter Earth history. To his credit, he hadn't acted from the impulse to dominate, but to improve the course of history. But he was breaking the first law of time, and so the doctor stopped him, once in Anglo-Saxon England, and once in Old Kingdom Egypt. But he was no longer a laughable little man. This regeneration was rough on the exterior, but charming and delightful once you got to know him. Soon, Redman seemed relaxed. The doctor realized he wasn't listening to Father Waterman's story, but had better start paying attention. "Well, there we were," Waterman concluded. "Smith here," he said, pointing to the doctor. "Thought I was a Russian spy. I thought he was a Russian spy, and it turned out he was just a tourist, and I was visiting friends." Waterman smiled his broad smile again. "Except you were spying," the doctor added. Waterman flashed his eyes at the doctor as if to say, "Don't push it." "I was passing on a few things to MI6, Waterman admitted, "but every British subject did in those days." He turned to Redman and spread his hands. "That's just how things were done." "Did you part as friends?" Redman asked. The doctor wasn't sure if she had believed Waterman's story or not. "Sort of," the doctor said. "No," Waterman replied firmly. "We had a night out in a part of town that doesn't notice drunk foreigners, and the next thing I know, I wake up on a plane headed for Timbuktu." Waterman sighed, crossed his arms, and looked at the doctor. "How did you manage that?" Redman asked the doctor. Waterman arched an eyebrow at the doctor as if to say, "Your turn." "I convinced him we were on our way to see Belgium versus Hungary in the Cup finals," the doctor added. "Is that what you said?" Waterman replied, as if genuinely surprised. "I really must have been 3 sheets to the wind." Redman laughed quietly. "So he could have been on his way to see you today?" she asked Waterman. Waterman shrugged. "I suppose so." She turned to the doctor. "And why exactly after all this time?" "I'd heard he was still alive," the doctor said, turning to Waterman. "Not many of us are from the old days." Redman nodded as if the idea were plausible. Then she stood and said, "I'll be right back." The door closed. As Redman stepped into the hallway, a green cop grabbed her arm. She pulled it away instinctively. The cop's face darkened, and he took a step toward her. Redman took a step back and looked down at the floor. "Sorry about that, sir. I didn't realize it was you." She couldn't remember when she last felt so humiliated. The Greek cop smiled darkly and handed her a folder. "What's this?" she asked. "The file on your suspect," he replied. "Read it, now." Inside the interrogation room, the doctor glared at Waterman. Waterman shushed him and reached into his pocket. He took out what appeared to be a tuning fork, which began to vibrate before he touched the prongs. "Sonic tuning fork," Waterman said. "They'll hear what they expect to hear, but once they play the tapes back, we've had it." "Spies in Egypt?" the doctor hissed. "What did you want me to say? That we last met 5,000 years ago when I was forced to work for genocidal pepper pots?" "You might have to tell them exactly that, if you don't get us out of here," the doctor said. "What?" "You heard me. I've nothing to lose. They'll learn I'm an extraterrestrial soon enough, and that I've defeated the Crenoids before. You either help me or you go down with me." "You wouldn't," Waterman said aghast. "I would," the doctor replied flatly. Waterman wiped the sweat from his forehead. "'Struth. I'd heard you'd gone dark, but I didn't believe it. I thought you were just a grumpy old git," he added with venom. The doctor grinned. "Get us out of here." "How? I'm just an Anglican priest with a small parish." "A fake Anglican priest? Well, yeah," Waterman admitted with a chuckle. "I was Jewish for a while." "What?" "Yeah, it was good cover, until I had to perform a bris." The doctor's face twisted in surprise and anger. "Now, don't get the wrong idea," Waterman added. "I used a sonic scalpel, and it was a simple, safe operation. But the kid's uncle figured out I had alien tech. I had to shave off the beard and become Protestant a bit sharpish." "Get us out of here," the doctor demanded. All right, Waterman said, as the door opened again. It was Redman, with 2 green police. Waterman quickly put his sonic tuner back into his jacket, but before he could say anything, Redman turned to him and said, "Shut up." Waterman closed his mouth in surprise and looked at the doctor. Redman turned to the doctor and held up a unit file. "Recognize this?" She slapped it down in front of him and opened it. It was his file with his picture inside. "Tourist, my foot," she said angrily. "You were the bloody president of Earth." "Ah," the doctor said. "Well," Waterman began. "And I suppose he's an alien too?" Redman asked the doctor, indicating Father Waterman. The doctor shrugged and nodded. Redman smirked and turned to the green police. "They're all yours," Redman said. Waterman backed himself toward the doctor as the green police moved toward them. Chapter 13. In Living Memory. Except for the light from the manhole cover, Sarah Jane was in darkness. She forced herself to move forward in case the green police had seen her, but within a few steps, she was night-blind. She took out her sonic lipstick and tried a few settings. After a moment, she found the infrared torch setting, and everything glowed red. This was a large sewer. It smelled awful, but it was dry. She moved forward and around a corner. A quick look back confirmed that the green police hadn't thought to look for her here so far. She wiped more tears from her eyes and changed the setting of the sonic lipstick to TARDIS location. A holographic map appeared, showing where she was and where she had to go. The light from the map was just enough to see by, but she had a long walk ahead of her. "Best foot forward," she whispered. She walked for what felt like hours in the darkness until she stumbled over some bricks lying in her path. She caught herself before she fell, but it made her realize how tired she was. A few feet away, she could just see what looked like the remains of a pallet. It was dry, so she sat on that, hugged her knees to her face, and tried not to think about what had happened to her friends, her world. Did Clyde and Rani escape? Was Luke helping the Crenoids? Where was Skye? How would the doctor fix this? How could she explain that she had met 3 people he had told her to avoid? After a minute, she heard an alarm on her sonic lipstick. She looked up. There were now 2 time machines registering. The TARDIS, still some miles away, and one nearby. Sarah Jane stood and moved quickly toward the second time machine. Maybe this was what the doctor was looking for, she thought. After a number of twists and turns, she encountered a brick wall. According to the sonic lipstick, the time machine was on the other side. Sarah Jane switched back to infrared and examined the wall carefully. By chance, there was a hole a few meters to her right, but it was too narrow to fit through. She tugged at a few bricks, hoping that wouldn't bring the rest down on top of her. Luckily, she was able to make a hole big enough to crawl through. Once inside, she changed the setting on her sonic lipstick to torch, and she couldn't believe what she was seeing. This was the basement where Operation Golden Age had been conducted all those years ago. But the Brigadier had all of this destroyed, Sarah Jane whispered to herself. Yet here it was, including an instrument panel which still had power. She moved closer to it. Sure enough, several analog meters were alight, and in the center was a large, glowing red button. Before she realized what she had done, she pressed the button. "No," she gasped, as the machine began to whine in a higher and higher pitch. She punched every button she could find, but nothing seemed to stop it. Suddenly, a blue light appeared on the wall next to her. Frantically, she kept pressing buttons, but as the blue light turned white, she could hear people talking. She stepped back and squinting, looked into the light. It appeared to be coming from a room on the other side of the wall. Several people were seated around a table, smiling and laughing, but she couldn't recognize them. One of the figures stood up and walked toward her. She took a few steps back. "Hello, Sarah," the figure said. He was a man, dressed in civilian clothes with a distinctly nautical air. After a moment, Sarah recognized him. "Harry?" she whispered. "My dear old thing," Harry Sullivan replied, smiling. "You're early." "You call me old thing one more time," Sarah Jane whispered, with a smile creeping over her face, "and I'll spit in your eye." It was Harry, who had died over 30 years ago. Harry laughed. "I must say, it's lovely to see you again," he continued with a smile. "But you still have work to do, you know." "What are you talking about?" "The doctor needs your help," Harry said. "Tell him from me, from all of us really, the Amazon basin." "Harry, I'm so sorry about—" she began as she stepped forward. Suddenly the lights were out. Sarah Jane jumped up from the pallet. She was still in the sewer and hadn't moved. "Just a dream," she whispered. She wiped her eyes again and checked her sonic lipstick. There was only one time machine registering, the TARDIS. She rubbed her neck and then set off once more.